It was a quiet morning at the Waffle House on Main Street, and Officer Johnson and Officer Diaz were enjoying their coffee. Suddenly, the front door of the restaurant swung open, and a disheveled hobo stumbled in. The hobo took a seat at the counter and immediately began scratching and sniffing his crotch. The other customers began to move away, uncomfortable with his behavior. Officer Johnson and Officer Diaz quickly sprang into action. "Excuse me, sir, but we're going to have to ask you to leave," Officer Johnson said firmly. The hobo looked up and glared at the officers. "I ain't doing nothing wrong. Just mindin' my own business, sir. Your behavior is making the other customers feel uncomfortable." "We need you to leave," Officer Diaz added. The hobo grumbled but eventually stood up and headed towards the door. As he reached for the door handle, Officer Johnson noticed a disturbing odor emanating from the hobo. "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you to come with us for a moment?" Officer Johnson said, stepping closer. The hobo looked suspiciously at the officer. "What for? We just need to ask you a few questions," Officer Diaz interjected. The hobo hesitated for a moment before reluctantly agreeing. Officer Johnson and Officer Diaz escorted him to their squad car and began questioning him. "Sir, we noticed a peculiar odor coming from you. Can you explain that?" Officer Johnson asked. The hobo shuffled his feet and looked down. "I ain't had a shower in a while, that's all. That's not what we're talking about. We noticed you kept smelling your own crotch. Why is that?" Officer Diaz pressed. The hobo shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I got an itch, okay? I can't help it." Officer Johnson and Officer Diaz exchanged a glance. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to submit to a search," Officer Johnson said. The hobo protested but eventually relented. As Officer Diaz searched him, he found a white powdery substance. The officers quickly tested it and confirmed it was cocaine. "You're under arrest for possession of an illegal substance," Officer Johnson declared, reading the hobo his rights. Despite his protests, the hobo was taken to the station and booked. It was a strange case, but Officer Johnson and Officer Diaz were glad they were able to get a dangerous drug off the streets.